James Hacker. Do you think that Hubbard knew about the damage and misery Scientology could/would cause? And if so, would he have cared? Great question, James. And of course, my go-to answer here is no. I don't think Hubbard really would have cared, and nor I don't think that he did, as evidenced by the actions he took during his years, during his life, to repair, make up for, somehow show that he cared, indicate that he cared in some fashion. And I know that there are people who knew L. Ron Hubbard who are still alive who speak apologetically about him, or at least, somewhat favorably try to push back against some of the claims or, abusive claims, I guess you could say, or disinformation about him. And of course, there is plenty of that too. But the information we have that is verified and true is damning enough that we don't really need to get into the hyperbole about it. L. Ron Hubbard was a complicated man, like I think most people are. But particularly, he had a lot of interesting things going on in his head. He was just sort of this con man. And I guess what I'd like to say about this and answering this question, or what was on my mind in taking this up, was pointing out that there are people out there who, the labels, right? We use these labels, or we talk about these labels: narcissist, malignant narcissist, sociopath, psychopath, pathological liar, all these various things to describe different modes of behavior, different ways that people act toward others or consider other people or make their way through the world. I think we still got a lot of work to do on this classification systems, the labels that we use to describe behavior and why people behave the way they do. It's been thought for decades, centuries, that, if a person was acting in an antisocial way, it was all them. It was somehow something wrong in their mind or their brain or their anatomy or their spirit that was messed up, that was abnormal. The study of this was first known as abnormal psychology, if I remember right, as though we have some kind of a definition of normal, as though we understand what the average human being is supposed to look like. We have no clue. I mean, what is this? How does that even, not no clue, but, certainly somebody, throwing their food or worse all over the walls, or trying to hurt themselves and that sort of thing. We kind of frown on that behavior. We say, hey, let's can rein that in a little bit and see if we can't help the person to live a little bit differently, a little bit more like the rest of us live. So sure, we can certainly point to certain kinds of behavior and go, well, that's off. But I think that there is something to intent. There's something to how people navigate the world in terms of what they're trying to do or what they're trying to accomplish. And I think that there are, I always throw this around. There's a certain percentage of people, right, who navigate the world as though they are hunters, or they are, or the rest of the world maybe is considered their prey. Their potential victims, the people that they can and should take advantage of, is how this certain percentage of people seem to navigate the world. And Hubbard was one of those people. Hubbard looked at other people as things to control, as things to have his way with, as things to take advantage of. That's how he saw other people. And I believe that there were times when he had true affinity for, or liking, or, I'm not going to go so far as to say love. I don't know that L. Ron Hubbard was capable of what you and I would think of as love. Unless, of course, we're talking about self-love. He certainly was enamored with himself, and with his infallibility, and with his greatness, and with his talent and ability, and he presented himself that way to anybody who would listen. And there were certain things he could do that he did have some degree of talent with. He could sit and write complete stories, which is a talent. Now, whether the stories were any good or not is another level of talent. And Hubbard's talent when it came to writing coherent, good stories, well, that's a subjective matter of opinion. My opinion, it happens to be that he wasn't very good at that. But the fact that he could just sit down and bang out a story is itself an ability. And I think that, in fact, helped his ability as a pathological liar, because he had quite the imagination and he was happy to use it to, so like I said, sort of control or take advantage of other people. And I think that his actions through his life, when you look at what he did, how he went about doing it, you see a person who, was sort of the mindset of, I bet I would rather ask for forgiveness than try to get permission first. He was one of those kind of people, and he did not count the cost in broken lives, ruined finances, messed up relationships, with his past relationships, with the way that he would use people and abuse them. Both physically, sexually, psychologically. He was a well-rounded abuser. And he was a serial philanderer and many other things. And we can point to those things as markers of character, and we can say this is a man who clearly, through his actions, demonstrated that he did not care for other people at the same level that he cared for himself and his own interests. And he always put himself first and everybody else second. So when you look at somebody like that and a continuing pattern of behavior throughout his life of deception, of lying, etc., then you see somebody who doesn't care about other people. Because when we talk about what it means to care about other people or care about the consequences of your actions in regards to those people, then we're talking about somebody who can empathize, who can have compassion, who can put themselves in somebody else's shoes and realize that the harm that they are causing this other person wouldn't feel good if they were receiving it. So therefore, they shouldn't do that. It's an interesting little complicated, logic train that you follow, that most of us learn at age 4 or 5 as we start growing out of our self-centered, egotistical, fully self-centered worldview. There's a thing called theory of mind, which discusses the idea it's a theory, right? It's an idea that children up until somewhere between the ages of 3 and 5 are wholly unaware of the existence of other people's minds. And so everything is perceived as though it's an extension of the entire world, is a sort of an extension of the child's mind or world. And he doesn't imagine that other people have independent, active minds of their own. Children don't understand this concept. It's something they have to graduate up to learning, and somewhere, like I said, between the theory, according to the way the theory goes, somewhere between the ages of 3 and 5, that sort of clicks, and they go, "Oh, whoa!" And it's sort of this dawning sort of realization. As well, it should be, because you suddenly realize that you are not the entirety of the world. And I'm not saying Hubbard, didn't have this realization. I think everybody, sort of has it. My point is that that there seems to be an inability somewhere in that logic train. Some kind of connection isn't being made when you have an inability to empathize or tolerate the differences of others, or have compassion for somebody who is suffering or in a situation that you should be able to at least gather some idea of what they're feeling, and have sympathy, support, understanding, these kinds of things. Somehow that series of mental accomplishments, breaks down for people like Hubbard, and they don't have compassion in the same way for other people. That I think again, coming to this dangerous idea of average person, your normal human being, right? We do see certain characteristics that obviously the majority of human beings seem to demonstrate, and empathy and compassion are two of those qualities or characteristics. But we see a certain percentage of people who don't seem to be able to do that, or seem to be faking it. It's learned behavior. They learn what it looks like, and they sort of follow along with the mouthing the words and making the motions, but it's not really there. In their head, they're not quite totally getting it. So I think that's where Hubbard was. So I think he was a conflicted individual who had his own issues and problems that he was very aware of, and he knew that he wasn't going to be able to solve them by himself. He came to the place or realization somewhere in the 40s, certainly after the war, that he was pretty screwed up. According to the information we have in his own writings through the affirmations, as well as the other things that he has said over the years. And so you have this man who is conflicted, who has physical problems, mental problems, emotional issues, knows he has those problems, knows that his interactions or relationships with other people have not resolved those issues, but somehow he wants to, and he wants to gain control and power over other people. That is a foundational motivation that L. Ron Hubbard had, again, according to his own writings. And making men into slaves was something he wrote as a goal. And this inability to empathize or have full, real compassion for, and that we get through his writings also. L. Ron Hubbard specifically wrote that sympathy was the least possible thing you could do for somebody. If you couldn't do anything else effective or useful for them, you could sympathize with them, indicating to me that he really was missing the boat on why sympathy or sympathizing or having compassion or empathy for somebody else is actually the first thing you have to do before you can really help them. And Hubbard, like David Miscavige, tried to replace that with impersonal methods and guidelines and techniques and processes and procedures. And he thought that those would be the worthy substitute. And if you simply run these processes and procedures, people will just naturally get better. And the only time Scientology ever really worked on somebody is when the auditor actually cared about the person in front of them and listened intently and carefully to them as a human being first and a Scientologist second. And that's why I say that Scientology really only works on other people, and the help that I received in Scientology or gave to other people in Scientology was really despite Scientology, not because of it. Okay, so anyway, I thought I'd hit these points here in answering this question. I hope that this was a useful answer and informative, so there you go.